It's harder than ever to get ahead. Chase Secure Banking is right there with you to help, with the convenience to manage your money from the Chase mobile app. Plus, it helps you spend only what you have. Because you want to get ahead of your expenses and want to get ahead in life. Chase Secure Banking, helping you get ahead. Open a Chase Secure Banking account today with no minimum deposit.
Every day, over 22,000 McDonald's crew members get up and head to work. And right now, more than ever, what they do is important. Like wearing a face covering and gloves, cleaning and sanitizing the restaurant, and putting safety first. Oh, and of course, making sure your order is filled. Because sometimes a Big Mac and fries is exactly what your day was missing.
Since you can't go to concerts, now we're bringing the concert right to your living room. In celebration of Harlem Week, it's a virtual concert with the Stylistics. It's the Dramatics. And the Blue Notes. We're bringing the concert to your living room. It's all part of the Harlem Week celebration. For more information, go online to harlemweek.com.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cheryl Wills from Spectrum News, New York One. It's an honor to be a part of this very important event, the Honorable Charles B. Rangel Systemic Racism and Economic Justice Summit. This conversation is needed now more than ever. I want to personally thank the congressman. He's always my congressman. I call him America's congressman. The Honorable Charlie Rangel has done so much for not just the village of Harlem, but for this entire country. And it's an honor anytime to share a platform with him. I only wish we could do it in person. I also want to thank Lloyd Williams, president of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for your leadership. It means so much to know that you are at the helm during Harlem Week, even during a pandemic. Let's get to the topic at hand. Systemic racism, economic justice. These are conversations that have plagued African Americans since we arrived on these shores 401 years ago. It is shocking to me that some people are being asked, does systemic racism exist? That is a shocking question. And the answers are equally shocking. But I think all of us gathered here today know the answer. Yes, systemic racism exists. It's in the fabric of this country. No one's happy about that. But we are gathered here today to talk about it, to come up with solutions, and to finally confront this head on. We've been confronting it for 400 years in many different ways, from slave revolts to the first African American men who were allowed to vote during Reconstruction, the civil rights movement, union organizers like A. Philip Randolph. We have been fighting and poking holes in systemic racism. But as we learned, watching the death of George Floyd, we saw without question that systemic racism is alive and well. We see it in so many different forms, in our schools, in business. It is time for a powerful talk to come up with powerful solutions. I want to take a moment to salute Senator Kamala Harris, soon to be Vice President of the United States. I think so many of us will agree that it is time for new leadership, for sane leadership, and I believe Senator Kamala Harris will make history in so many ways. She understands, as a prosecutor, as a senator, that systemic racism is alive and well. It is stunning to me that the debate continues also about the Confederate flag and what it means. My friends, someone should ask a descendant of a Black Civil War soldier, which I'm proud to say I am, what the Confederacy means. The fact that there's a debate shows that we're not educating the masses properly about the Civil War. The Confederacy helped ignite systemic racism and keep it going. After slavery ended, they doubled down and created the Ku Klux Klan. Please ask a descendant of a Civil War soldier, Sandy Wills. Again, I'm Cheryl Wills, his great-great-great-granddaughter, what the Confederacy stood for. It stood for hate. It stood for the subjugation of Black people forever. It stood for stomping on the necks of Black people eternally. And here we are in 2020, even in the middle of a pandemic, seeing it still play out. The Confederate flag should not fly in this country on any public space. This is how we stamp out systemic racism, by getting rid of the old vestiges that remind us of people who wanted to keep Black people under their thumb forever. It is time for that to end. And along with that, economic justice. It goes hand in hand. Economic justice. Now is the time. Marching is fine, but it is time for us to put our dollars together and stop giving our money away to people who do not circulate it and recirculate it in the African American community. This is what my great-great-great-grandfather fought for when he was a member of President Lincoln's army as a soldier in the United States Colored Troops. I'm well qualified to talk about systemic racism. It has affected my family. My family has been here for more than 250 years dealing with this. And it is a shame that in 2020, I still have to deal with this. I raised a son. My son is now 22 years old, and I raised him in a state of fear. That is shameful. No one has committed a crime, but yet we were treated as criminals. It's the same as when our families came across the shores and they were locked up having committed no crime. This is still happening. So I am looking forward to today's conversation. There's so many different angles that we have to address, from the criminal justice system to, of course, economic justice to systemic racism. But I am speaking to you as a proud great-great-great-granddaughter of a soldier who said, let's keep marching on. The fight is not won. We, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, are still fighting the Civil War. Stop and think about it. Even our battle lines, the North versus the South, almost identical to 1861. It is time for this country to stop fighting the Civil War. It is time for this country to apologize for what has happened to Black Americans. There's never been a formal apology. There's never been reparations. That's what's feeding into this systemic racism. How do you attempt to destroy an entire race of people, destroy their right to freedom and their right to justice, equal justice? And when you're done and exposed on television cameras, you just say, okay, no, we needed an apology. We needed reparations. We still need all of this because the debt has not been paid. I have had the privilege of actually tracking down the plantation where my family once toiled in Haywood County, Tennessee. And I can tell you, for anyone that's ever been able to find where their family was held hostage and forced into slavery, it is a humbling thing. It is very humbling. And it's also a wake-up call. So I'm looking forward to a wake-up call with this conversation in honor of the great Charles Rangel. Charles Rangel did so much for the village of Harlem and this nation. This conversation is for him. Let's speak truth to power. Let's speak truth to power without reservation and without hesitation. It's an honor to address you. Thank you for allowing me to speak these few words. And lastly, I will not rest until I recover the remains of Private Sandy Wills, who served in the United States Colored Troops from 1863 to 1865. He was buried, like so many of our ancestors, in an unmarked grave, despite his heroism. Despite, you want to talk about systemic racism? There's your systemic racism. A Black soldier served in an army that didn't even value him as an American citizen. And when he died, they just said, bury him wherever. And they buried him wherever. But I found him. And part of my strike at systemic racism is to unearth the remains of Private Sandy Wills and his wife Emma and give him a decent burial in a military cemetery. It's not too late. It's never too late to right an historic wrong. And that's what we're doing today. Let's figure out solutions to right historic wrongs and make this country what it is destined to be. I'm Cheryl Wills. Thank you to the Honorable Charles Rangel for this opportunity to address this auspicious group of Americans.
Welcome. Welcome to the Charles B. Rangel Systemic Racism and Social Justice Summit. And welcome to our panel presentation on the legacy of racial division. I'm Casey Matthews, Chief of Staff at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. And I'm honored to be the moderator of this particular panel. We have an extraordinary group of folks who are going to share their experiences with you about this extraordinary topic. To begin, we're going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little about themselves. The top 2 or 3 things. With such an experienced panel, we could actually spend the entire time talking about them. We want to dig into the topic. Deatrice, would you start us off, please?
Absolutely. I'm Deatrice Bolden. I'm the Managing Director of Impact Repertory Theater. I'm also a proud board member of Harlem Week, Inc. I'm an artist in my own right. I have hit the stages of Off-Broadway and beyond. But my love is definitely for the youth at Impact and all over the tri-state area.
Lou, how about it?
My name is Lou Katzos. I'm the president of Jekmar Associates, which is a construction management consulting firm for developers. I'm also a board member of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce. In addition, I'm involved in other organizations. One is EMCA, the East Mediterranean Business Culture Alliance, as well as HEPA, the American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association.
And Mr. Michael Garner.
Hi, I'm Michael J. Garner. I'm the Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at the MTA, the most immediate past president of the founding chapter of the 100 Black Men, and now chairman of the corporate board of the founding chapter of the 100 Black Men.
Our topic today is the legacy of racial division. And we're going to accept the premise that we believe that racial division does indeed exist. And we're going to begin by asking each of our panelists to talk a little bit about their earliest experiences with racism, whether it's personal from home, whether it's career, that significant moment or that early awareness to racism that they first experienced. Michael, would you lead us off?
Absolutely. I'm from Harlem, grew up, was born in Harlem, but was raised in Chicago on the South Side. And Chicago is the most segregated city in the country. Segregation created black wealth. But when I was in high school, we had 8th grade books. And so I was a sophomore, we had an 8th grade book. And how did I know we had an 8th grade book? Because in 8th grade, we had the same book. So being discriminated against of not having the same resources as other schools in the city of New York, being redlined and being segregated. That was my first experience with racism, but it was from an economic perspective of being discriminated against in racism.
Lou, would you tell us a little bit about your experiences, please?
Certainly. I wasn't born in the United States. I came actually when I was very young. And I lived in East New York, which itself was a neighborhood that was a minority neighborhood, basically. And I never thought about racism, quite frankly, or races, until I think I got a little bit older. When I was in school, one of the first things that I was asked in some cases, and maybe on a yearly basis, is to fill out a form that indicated who you were. And one of the problems that I had, a serious problem, was checking the box. And I always checked the other box because I always considered myself Hellenic. And at times it became problematic for some of the teachers. They said, no, you cannot check that box. So it was a difficult time period for me. And when I really experienced, I think, racism issues the way our panel is going to be discussing them, is when I got older and I was in the industry, and it related to the construction industry, which is where I come from. Certainly in both private and public areas is where I noticed it the most, and we can go into that a little bit in more detail later.
Deatrice?
So I was born in the Bronx, raised in Harlem, school, church, all in Harlem. I believe my first memory of racism was with my mentor, Jamal Joseph. He's a former Black Panther, and seeing everything that they've done, and then being with my young people. Actually, one time, we went to a diner. We took them to the MoMA, and we went to a diner, and there was a family there, and she called all of us the N-word. And I had young people as young as 8 with me who had never experienced something like that. So, and she was like, could you please leave, because me and my family are trying to eat. And it was so heartbreaking. Some of my young people, of course, started to cry. But that was my first real true experience with racism.
You know, throughout history, we've seen lots of steps forward, and then we see the inevitable step backward, that backlash. And the panelists and I have spoken about this a little bit. Whether it's Reconstruction followed by Jim Crow laws, or perhaps the election of the first black president, followed by the current administration and the situation the country finds themselves in now. So this week, we actually saw the nomination of the first woman of color as vice president on a major political party ticket. And the question is, how do you feel about this? Is this a step forward? Are you automatically thinking about the next backlash that comes? Let's talk a little bit about the step forward and the step back. Deatrice, how about it? What do you say?
Well, I think a lot of people are focusing on the fact that she's an African-American woman and not the fact that we're progressing. That the fact that there is a change happening, I'm actually all for it. I am staying prayerful that everything does work out in our favor. She's done marvelous work so far in the position that she has. But I need people to start focusing on the progress that's happening and just not the name that's behind the position.
Michael, what do you think?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, the mere fact that she was nominated, it's a great thing. But we had a black president for 8 years. And it seems like the pushback was immediate. So, for example, we experienced slavery from 1619 into the mid-1880s. And then there was a small window of opportunity for black people in this country. And then we experienced the civil rights movement. And then we elected the first black mayor of this great city that we're sitting in right now. And then we inherited Rudy Giuliani, in which we went through 8 years of hell in this city. And so I think it's too early. Ask me the same question 8 years from now, and I can give you an answer of whether or not her appointment had an impact on the lives of black Americans in this great country that we live in.
We're going to have that discussion. I look forward to it. Lou, how about you? What do you think about this moment that we're going through right now? Step forward and step back.
I think certainly it's a positive what happened in terms of the naming of the vice president, but I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it from the point of view of just asking the question, to me, is sort of like problematical, because you say to yourself, why are we even asking the question? In other words, why aren't there more people in certain positions, more than one president who's African American or a minority, or women African Americans, or to be vice presidents, or any other position? So the fact that we're asking the question is in a way going back to what you said, Michael, because one person in my mind does not make a difference in society. I think there's something definitely wrong with the question that we have to pose it that way. That's just my opinion.
Well, Lou is correct. I mean, listen, we've been here since 1619. Let's talk about from a historical perspective. This country was created and built because of a rebellion of the British tea tax. And the second rebellion, a black person was killed. And so we've been here since day one. So for us to be sitting here talking about the nomination of a black female being historic when we've been here since 1619, I'm not going to celebrate that until there has been some immediate impact on, once again, the lives of the black community in this country.
Leads us to a good topic. So I've recently read the book by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I certainly recommend the book. It actually is very, very thought-provoking. And in his book, Kendi talks about having to go beyond the awareness of racism. And we actually started our discussion with our awareness, our awakening to racism. But Kendi actually is asking people to understand that you have to go beyond saying, well, I'm not racist. We have lots of people in this country who, it's almost a reflex now, well, of course, I'm not racist. But Kendi poses the question, well, what are you doing to eradicate racism? Are you an anti-racist? And that's really the question. It actually speaks to what some of the panelists have already said. We're in this situation now. So what are the solutions? What are some of the things that we can do that talk about the policies and the actual actions in our own lives, whether it's personal or professional, that allows us to be and become an anti-racist? So Deatrice, you work in a cultural arts and in a youth services space. Talk a little bit about what you do in your life with regard to that.
Well, at Impact, all of the material artistically and the choreography is written and inspired by the young people. So at Impact, we use the arts for the young people to channel whatever anger they have and use it in a positive way to change the atmosphere around them. We've had some, it is a safe space, so they don't have to worry about getting in trouble for some of the language that they may use. And my young people are very opinionated, and what that does is helps give them an outlet, and we're raising the future. They have to take this movement over, just like we were raised by our parents and grandparents on taking the movement over that we have now. The whole Black Lives Matter movement is led by young people, and without them, it's going to become stagnant. So we have to pour into our young people. I am a firm believer in opening your own life and making it accessible so that they can see the things that happen in your life and how it can change theirs.
And we're still talking about solutions. How do we actually find a way forward, some of the things that we do in our lives? Lou, how about you? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, to me, it's a very serious problem, because going back again, I hate to go into the history and go back to Michael's point, but I think the fact that this nation has been through slavery for a long period of time, longer than any other nation, and slavery is not a new thing historically. I mean, there was slavery from the ancient periods all the way into modern times, quite frankly, and there is also slavery in a different form throughout the world, even today. But here in America, I think what took place historically had a serious effect on the way we look at race. We really should not be discussing racial differentials. We really should be talking about people, not races. We should be talking about someone who has certain attributes, etc. But the fact that we're talking about this is again one of these things that when I think about it becomes a real serious problem to me. Growing up, when I was in the streets of New York, and I was with friends, I didn't differentiate between people. So for me, I think what has to happen is we have to really reach out, talk to each other, and have a real serious conversation that I don't think that this nation has had. There have been times, because of certain incidences, that people talk to each other, but then they just fell back into whatever their routine is. So the change, in my mind, that's needed has to be, to a certain degree, I don't like to use the word radical, but it really has to be radical in a sense. People have to just talk to each other and go through the history and the pain and suffering of other people. And if the people start talking to each other on a personal to personal level, I think maybe there'll be change. But it's difficult in this particular nation. I hate to say it. It's difficult.
We're talking about solutions, Michael.
Mm-hmm. The solution that's respected in this country is going to be in the form of economics. We're sitting here in the Charles B. Rangel Center conference room. Gave me inspiration of a black man from Harlem having the ability to rise to the chairman of Ways and Means in the U.S. Congress. That gives me inspiration. We are also sitting in the Fortune 500 capital of the world, where there's billions of dollars in transactions taking place every day. But if you drive over the 138th Street Bridge, you're in the Bronx. The Bronx is the third poorest county in the country. That section of the South Bronx is the poorest section in the nation. What would avert that and what would eradicate that for solutions is if blacks and Hispanics had the ability to obtain a job or a contract, it would eradicate all of the adverse living conditions that we currently live in. Affordable housing, health care, education. So we need to focus on economics. Isn't it ironic that Richard Nixon created the set-aside programs in contracting in government? Because Nixon felt that if you empowered black business, they would hire others in the black community, and there would be a downward spiral on the unemployment in the black community. And so we have to focus on dollars and economics and having the black community and other minorities given and afforded the same opportunity to become part of the American dream of this country that we live in.
So Michael brings up resources, which is actually a great segue to where I'd like to take our discussion for a moment. So access to resources as well as the denial of resources. So right now we're actually hearing a lot from the folks who are advocating for strategic anti-racist reforms. We've heard about defunding systems of oppression. Now, this is not the law enforcement panel, so we're not necessarily asking you to talk about defunding police, but the idea of reapportioning resources is actually a great discussion. We often have it often goes nowhere, but there seems to be quite an interesting discussion going on. So Dietrich, let's talk a little about resources and what you have to do in your particular space, working with youth and arts and culture, and how you feel about reapportioning resources.
Well, especially during this pandemic, resources for arts and culture and youth have diminished quite a bit. And it's very unfortunate because a lot of young people are now stuck at home anyway because of the COVID virus, but now they don't have an outlet. And them being stagnant allows their minds to wander, and sometimes it does not go into the proper direction. Fortunately, we've had some help by our Manhattan Borough President, Gail Brewer, with getting some funding for the young people for school help, especially now they're being homeschooled, so they don't have the proper tutors. Like you said, it's all about economics. How are these young people going to get proper jobs? How are they going to support their families? A lot of them depend on, as for instance, the SYEP program to help money for the family during the summer. SYEP was cut. A lot of the resources that we are used to in our communities of color have diminished, and it's very sad. So for organizations such as Impact, which is a free program for young people, we keep our doors open virtually so they know that they can reach out to us, not just for arts and culture, but for education, for mental health, mental awareness. We had a town hall that was open to the young people in Harlem. We thought it was going to last an hour and a half. It ended up lasting 3 hours as they poured out their feelings and their crying, cyberbullying through the pandemic, through the loss of funding. Young people are now attacking each other because of their beliefs, because this person doesn't believe in the Black Lives Matter movement, so now they're fighting. It's become kind of ridiculous. So we need to dig deep into some more resources, reach out to some more people. Hopefully they will not just open up their hearts and their mouths, but their wallets.
Lou, how about in your field and in your work? How do resources play in changing our structure some?
Well, if we're talking about the minority community in particular, and before I get into that, let me just add that the way you get more resources is exactly the way Michael discussed it, and that's to grow the economy and create working opportunities, job opportunities, the ability to get small businesses, make them larger businesses, put people in the workforce, as was indicated earlier. And then that creates a tax base that, quite frankly, allows you then to do different things with regards to the arts and other things. In our particular industry, there are resource issues, in particular with smaller companies, minority companies. In many cases, they do not have the opportunity to grow because they don't have the ability to have financial resources, get banking loans and things of that nature that will allow them to keep staff and allow them to have money in the bank, for example, while they're waiting for requisitions to be paid by either private industry or public industry. The lack of funds, the lack of ability to have financial resources, the ability to get loans, temporary and otherwise, does not give the opportunity for anyone to really grow. As a matter of fact, you can create situations, if a payment doesn't come in on time, where these companies that normally would grow like any other companies actually fail and go bankrupt.
Michael, I know you've done a lot in your work professionally, as also with regard to your civic engagement, but talk a little bit about resource distribution in your work.
So I work for this organization called the MTA. We are the largest transportation network in North America, employing about 75,000 people, and we service 5,000 square miles. We have a $16 billion annual budget, and we buy $6.2 billion in goods and services. And so we've created a number of programs for the smaller minority women-owned firms to come in to get access to contracts in various areas like investment banking, construction, information technology, A&E focuses. So we became the first agency last year to pay in excess of $1.1 billion to minority women-owned firms in 1 year. And the reason why that's important, because we understand that when there's an access to a contract, a firm will hire more people, they will have a path to home ownership, they have better educational opportunities, and they have better health care options. And I was appointed to that position by the first black governor of the Empire State, David Patterson, who I give kudos to having a vision to empowering black businesses and minority-owned businesses. So we are, in fact, giving back. As the current chairperson of the corporate board, the founding chapter of the 100 Black Men, we give out $100,000 a year in college scholarships. We have fed 16,000 people by buying hot meals from black restaurants during COVID-19. And we are the voice of reason for people who cannot speak up for themselves. We are the 100 Black Men, 175 of the most powerful black men of this region, including a former mayor, current and former congressmen, state senators, city council people, business leaders, and judges. And so we are leading the way to empower people who cannot fight for themselves.
So recently, certainly through this spring and this summer, black and brown folks, all people who believe in equality, we've all been through quite a bit, from the coronavirus pandemic to the tragic death of George Floyd. It's been said that the death of George Floyd will be this generation's Emmett Till. On a pre-call, I shared with panelists that, growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, we were very used to being told, be careful what neighborhood you go into because you may not come out of it. And my Emmett Till growing up was Michael Griffith and his death in Queens. And I just want all the panelists to reflect for a moment. What does this moment in time mean for them? What's been the hardest part, if you don't mind sharing something personal, about this moment in time for each of you? Michael, would you start us off?
Well, the hardest part was being locked up in quarantine since March. When you're not used to being inside, not having the ability to live the way that we're used to living is something that we got to deal with psychologically. But we are in a very unique period right now, because not only are we in a COVID-19 pandemic, we are in a recession, which means that when the country is in a recession, Black America is in a depression. And then there are international and national civil rights protests. And so I sort of kind of align this current period with 1968, with the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, uprising in the streets, race riots in urban America, and the Vietnam War. And so as a result of those protests, Washington flooded the urban areas with resources and finances. So as a result, we had CETA and model cities, the college student loan programs, Head Start, and other kind of benefits that we rolled from 1968 until the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. And Ronald Reagan got in and he turned the hands of time back, and he eradicated all of those social programs that we benefited from for that 12 or 13 year period. He understood that most of the cities had black mayors and a black power base, and yet he focused on the counties and the suburbs to get elected and reelected, and rode the anti-crime or the crime factor in being elected and reelected president. And so we essentially have benefited, but we are now at a time that this moment has to be a moment, and it cannot be a moment. I'm sorry, it needs to be of movement and not a moment, because we need to learn from 1968 how we can finally get it right, how we can eradicate racism in this country, because I'm not patient enough to have a conversation, an intelligent conversation with anyone in 2020 of why Apple does not have a black on their board. I'm just not patient enough to have an intelligent conversation with an equity like that. And we have not become sophisticated enough to boycott Apple or not buy Apple products because they don't respect us, they don't hire us, and they don't have any blacks on their board. And so we are at a moment which we need to push into a movement, and it's being aligned by the Black Lives Matter movement. because the younger generation, they're not as patient as we are. And so they are, in essence, driving the effective change that really should have happened years ago. So this has to be of movement, and it cannot be a moment.
Dietrich, let's hear a little bit about how your youngsters, this younger generation, is actually dealing with what they're experiencing right now. What are you finding at Impact?
Well, like Michael says, it's about the movement, and they are definitely making their mark with protests, with flash mobs in front of the state office building. They are putting what Impact believes in. We're supposed to be the message that we bring, and Impact has a very strong message, and they're going out there and putting it in people's faces. There's no time to hide behind your words. It's time to be outspoken, because this is a turning point. We can fail tremendously if we don't keep pushing this movement forward. There is no need for us to go back. I go back to the Black Panther movement. When people don't want to give you the resources in these big corporations, when they wanted to start the breakfast program, you then needed to go to the small mom and pop stores to get breakfast food. Can you donate eggs? Can you donate pancake mix? That's basically what our young people are going out there doing. They're going to the different politicians. They're going to different offices. They're putting themselves out there saying, we need you to do this. Or if you don't, we're going to stand here. We're going to boycott. We're going to protest. Like you said, a lot of people cannot stop buying Apple products, knowing that we don't have an African-American person on the board. And it's sad in a way. But looking towards our young people, they're going out there, they are doing it artistically, they're doing it in sports, they're being the message that they're bringing, they're moving forward in protest, and I'm very proud to be one of their teachers and seeing that the progress that they're making. But it also saddens me because some of this stuff does put them in a depressed state of mind because of the backlash that they get from certain family members or certain friends about the things that they're doing in the community, and the way that they're changing their thought process. So it's a win-lose situation kind of going.
And Lou, how about you? What's happening for you, and what's going on in your world in this moment in time?
This moment is a very, very strange moment for me. I mean, usually I'm out, about, always talking to people, etc. Now we're behind masks, we can't hug anybody. So it's a problematic time, and hopefully it'll be behind us. In terms of the discussion, I think the murder of George Floyd was a historic, pivotal moment when there was an opportunity for people to really, really have some change. I think in my mind, and I'm saddened by it, what followed, and which is being used politically, okay, what followed and which is being used politically, becomes itself a problematic issue. It almost goes back to what Michael was talking about, where you had certain change taking place, and then because of safety issues and all the rest of that, you have a counter movement. So right now, we're in a pivotal scenario between the two sides. We don't know exactly which direction it will take place, and we're not going to talk politics, but elections become important right now.
You know, and another thing is people think that the small things that they're doing are being overlooked. Just like at the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, our Support Harlem Now campaign, every little bit helps. Whatever you can do, it's just not about the big movement. You have to take small steps to get to the place that you want to be. So if people start changing their mindset into having to make this whole extravaganza thing and just start taking your time, pushing forward, and we'll make progress eventually, you know.
You know, we talked about resources, and we can go back to 40 acres and a mule after slavery. We can talk about reparations right now. So, and Lou is correct, we are at a critical moment where both sides need to talk to each other so we can bring balance economically, so we can make sure and ensure that every citizen in this country has the ability to flourish, to to become educated, to have access to health care, to have access to home ownership, not be rent-lined. And so we must get this right now. And intelligent people have a way of talking to each other and not talking at each other in order to form viable solutions and strategies in which to move forward.
Ed, Michael's suggestion last night, I saw an incredible film. He recommended that I see the Yusef Hawkins Storm Over Brooklyn film on HBO. It was showing last night, and I've lived through that period of time, so this was not new to me. But I haven't seen that or heard some of those things at this point in years, so it was shocking. You know, we grow up in this city, and because this is being filmed for Harlem Week, let's talk a little bit about our city and about our community and about Harlem. I know that since we've been in pandemic, you hear lots of conversations with young people about how surprised they are about the depth of what they think they are witnessing in the racism in the United States. So Dietrich, please make sure that your students see that film.
Yes.
Although I know that with work you do with Impact and Jamal Joseph, part of your work is also making sure they understand the history. It's impossible to project what's happening next. It's possible to make change in your future if you don't really understand the past. Let's talk a little bit about what changes we've been seeing in New York. And I'm not trying to depress anybody, but I think it's important that we recognize that. One of the things that struck me in the film last night was how the young people didn't really understand, but some of their parents, their adults, the older folks in the neighborhood told them, well, you don't just go into certain neighborhoods. That's an awful thing to have to live through, and I lived through that as a kid. I'm not sure that's really changed in New York City for folks of color. I'm not so sure. But Dietrich, how do you address these kinds of topics, the historical reality and the reality of now with young people?
Well, you actually hit the nail on the head. In creating our artistic pieces, we have leadership training classes. So we watch different films like the one that I'm going to show my young people that you recommended, Michael. We've watched just a lot of films. So one thing is you just have to teach, you have to educate. You have to educate the young people. The change that I'm seeing, there was at one point, the neighborhood just seemed cold. There was no movement. People were scared to get close to one another, and it started reflecting in how people loved one another or communicated with one another, stopped talking to one another. It became a very depressive state, and I became very worried about my young people at that time because there was nothing that they can do. They're stuck at home. Not only are they stuck at home, they are required to do the schoolwork that they do in a school building with teachers that can personally help and tutor them. They started falling behind in classes. They started getting depressed because they weren't getting their work assignments in on time, which was cutting back on time that they can do whatever it was their outlet virtually, whether it was Impact or talking to their friends. It was just, it's sad. So we just have to continue to educate our young people and continue to show them where we came from Jim Crow, through the Black Panther Party, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, and lean on some of those heroes that we still have here today, like Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and Charles Rangel. You know, they still have those people here that can talk to them, that can nurture them and educate them about the power that's within them and how to use the power within them to make the change.
Lou is someone who's been in the space of development and engineering and also working with students where you have over decades outside of the construction work and development and design work that you do. What changes have you seen in New York City, or have you seen changes?
You're talking about recent changes.
Yeah, over time.
Well, over time things were getting better, but in this current environment, quite frankly, with the COVID issue, with office buildings being half empty, with restaurants that can't open and small businesses that can't open, and people not being able to have more than X amount of people coming into their stores and all the rest of that, it's a very difficult time. Many of these small businesses in particular are going to go bankrupt. A lot of stores will not open up. And the children that you were talking about in terms of virtual learning and all the rest of that, many of the children didn't have the internet capabilities to even learn. They didn't have, if they had the internet, maybe their tablets, they had no tablets to work with. And this is where the system, quite frankly, has failed. And I think the most important thing that we're getting out of this, in my mind, is the economic issue, I think, that you brought up, Michael. Without the economic issue being taken care of, a lot of the things that we're talking about are not going to change. So the economics, everyone has to focus on the economics. Developing small companies, giving people the ability to grow those companies, and maybe become major companies, and to the point of all these mega companies that have been taking place recently. I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar companies not having on their boards, for example, people of color and all the rest of that. These are really serious issues. In other words, people BS about what they're doing, this and that. They're giving some money, but giving someone some money is not the issue. The issue is for them to get the money to be able to create jobs, create businesses, and then do exactly what Michael was talking about, and where in fact it becomes a better place. But right now it's not there, and I agree that something has to be done right now.
Michael, your professional and your civic work takes you into all neighborhoods of New York City, and you've experienced some of what I discussed earlier in the question, even personally. Talk a little bit about this topic for you.
We are living in a city, as my good friend Jeff Eden knows from the NAACP. Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson, the songwriting team, wrote an album called Winter in America. And one of the songs on that album is that the revolution will not be televised. We are on the verge of a revolution in this country. And you cannot govern from the extreme left. You cannot govern from the extreme right. You have to govern in the middle. And so the America that I see, that I have confidence in, where these protests are taking place, where you have white, Asian, blacks, everybody of like minds, they are out protesting. That's the real America that I want to see and I want to be a part of. But like in Chicago last weekend, when there was a law enforcement shooting on the south side of Chicago, and some misinformation was forwarded around, and there was an organized effort for young people to go downtown in the Gold Coast and smash and loot at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. 100 arrests. We cannot tolerate that kind of behavior in this country if we're serious about bringing equality. I understand the frustration. I understand that this country is a country that was built on rebellion and revolution. I understand that the only thing that we respect in this country is power and wealth. But like I said before, Lou, that we need to have like-minded people from an array of places talking to each other and not talking at each other in driving effective change. When I see City Hall Park being taken over, when I see massive protests, when I see people going in Macy's at 3 o'clock in the morning and looting and setting fires, we need to get this right, because no one can live like this. Business people cannot make money in this kind of environment, and citizens cannot be employed in order to bring home wealth and income so they can become part of the American dream. So I'm faithful, I'm prayerful, I'm hopeful that we can get this right. But we have not seen the economic impact yet. I'm foreseeing that this country is teetering on a depression because the economy is not functioning the way that it should function. And we all know, once again, that when the nation is in a recession, Black America is in a depression. And so we need to get this right, and we need to get it right quickly.
And just to that point, to get it right, and some of the things that you talked about, those same things are used not to get it right. Okay, that's the bad part about all this. In other words, the looting, all these things that you were discussing, are used then for political aspects to in fact ensure that it doesn't become right. So again, difficult times, but I think it's a time to really get together and try to get it right. We haven't gotten it right yet, but we should at least try to get it right.
Listen, you know, we're a nation. We are an experiment. We're a collection of states, red states versus blue states. We experienced a civil war in this country where almost 1 million people lost their lives in the war. Urban versus rural. We kind of shift. So we're at the extreme left right now. And as Lou indicated, that there are going to be individuals who are going to take advantage of the crime in order to run on a crime bill in order to maintain the status quo. We talk about George Floyd, and I'm part of the Eric Garner family. Eric Garner was my cousin. But we talk about what happened in 2014 when it took this family 5 years to get some sense of justice by having the officer fired. The officer should have been fired, arrested, convicted, and serving time. But thankfully, the leaders in Minnesota got it. Because when those officers murdered George Floyd, they essentially fired those officers, indicted them, and locked them up, and they're going to trial in a very, very short period of time. But we can't forget about the other people who were murdered in this city. Eleanor Bumpurs, a grandmother, back in the 1980s, who got shot by an officer. That officer was not convicted. Amadou Diallo, murdered. Nothing happened. And so we need to make sure that law enforcement serves and protects respectfully every citizen in this country. And if you murder somebody in this country, I don't care if you are wearing blue, you should be fired, arrested, indicted, and convicted like anybody else in this country.
When we gather next year for the annual Charles B. Rangel Summit, I know we're still going to have a conversation on race, on racism, and not always sure what that conversation will be like. Hopefully it'll be different every time we have the discussion. I'm not of the opinion that it's going to go away overnight. I would love to be able to take a stick of dynamite and shove it at racism and blow it up. I don't see that happening. I liken it to it being a big boulder, and I see us chipping away at it. And we can either chip away with little implements, sledgehammer, or stick of dynamite. So I want you folks to think for a second. Let's think about some pearls of wisdom we can actually leave with our viewers. What would be a way forward in your industry, in your private life, in the community, if you could actually think about some things that you think would actually help chip away at this boulder? What would you suggest? Lou, what would you suggest? What comes to mind for you?
Well, what comes to mind is number one, education. I think it's extremely important. We touched on it a little bit, but I think education is a real important thing. I think in terms of education, I think we have to teach people how to become entrepreneurs. You know, rather than studying some of the things that people are studying, we should teach them how to open up businesses, how to open up bank accounts, how to save money, and all the rest of that. And I think also the concept of the economic aspect being the most important aspect that basically changes everything is something that we should work on, and hopefully we will. And I think we have to, for the younger people, I think we have to get them in the mood for this, for the economic aspect of it, and to think that way. Because once you have some money, you can buy the home that you were talking about, you can buy the cars, you can develop businesses, you can hire people, and in the end, that's going to be the thing that starts to eliminate racism in this country. The other things are not going to do it. The economics is probably the most important thing, as Michael brought out initially in the conversation.
Deatrice, how about it? A way forward, something that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Well, as an African American people, we all, since slavery times, have had our own beliefs. So, of course, I'm going to lean on my beliefs and, like I said earlier, stay prayerful. Also, using the media and social media as a way to de-brainwash our young people on how a person is supposed to live, the blink of it all. It's not about that. We need to continue to use social media and the media to show all of the Black Lives movements, to show all of the protests, to continue to educate and encourage them to be of social change and not of this rapper mentality. I say that constantly, this big blink sports mentality, but to use whatever platform that you have for social change and just not for the gain of popularity. Again, it is all about economics. It's about teaching them how to invest in themselves, to save money so that they can have the foundation to have the families that they dream of and the houses and the cars, but to live comfortably and to continue to change the society around them and get out of this systemic racism mindset. And if we can continue to push and educate our children in that way, we will then hit on economics and education and continue to push for them to go to those 4-year colleges and universities, get those degrees, and, stay focused, stay on the course. That's part of the change.
Michael, how about it? The way forward.
Lou said it right, that we need to train our youth in becoming business owners. There was a story that I lived back in the early 70s of the Reverend Jesse Jackson called for a boycott of GM because GM was not giving blacks dealerships. And they found a young super selling salesman in Chicago and brought him here and set him up in a Oldsmobile dealership. Oldsmobile, you weren't born back then, right? And that Oldsmobile pivoted to a Cadillac dealership, and that Cadillac dealership became the highest grossing Cadillac dealership in the country, and that was Dick Gitron. When we are afforded the opportunity, we can flourish and will flourish like anyone else. There was a mayor, big city mayor named Harold Washington, and I've been blessed to have always had a black congressman, Ralph Metcalf in Chicago, Harold Washington in Chicago. And Mayor Washington asked me a question one day when I was a college student. He said, I walk around with my urban planners. You know why? I said, no, why? He said, because if you're not planning, you're being planned. If you're not planning, you're being planned. So we should take this moment to plan, to organize, to vote, fill out our census forms, demand that we get adequate resources when that federal funding comes so we can become part of the American dream. We got to organize, we got to demand, and we got to force equality in this great nation that we live in.
We are appropriately going to give Michael Garner the last word among the panelists. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And on behalf of Harlem Week and the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much for tuning into this panel and to the Charles B. Rangel Summit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you for joining Congressman Rangel's Systemic Racism and Social Justice Summit. This summit is a very important one, particularly at this time in our nation and certainly within Greater New York City, as we are fighting to address a number of issues tied to inequality that have systemically held back many people from being able to live out their full potential. As you think about some of the key issues that have been discussed today, the responsibility with our youth is extremely important, and small business entrepreneurship is extremely important in terms of relevance and systemic improvement in our economy. Our small businesses and our youth will need continued education and support of us all in order to ensure that we grow as a nation and ensure that our neighborhoods, block by block, remain strong. E-commerce, as an example, will be a critical part of what we will have to think about for many of our small businesses on the other side of the pandemic. We believe that this is important as you think about the social impact of education, because in order for you to reach customers and to remain competitive, the ability to have e-commerce will be extremely important. It's also important that as we talk to our youth and we think about our future, we understand the circulation of dollars. I invite you all to participate in an exercise that I've often shared with friends and as I've participated in financial education seminars. And that exercise is to take a look in your cabinets and your closet. Find 3 things that you are a frequent purchaser of. And of those 3 things, identify if those items are part of a company that's publicly traded. If so, go online and find out how much the stock is being traded for, and purchase at least 1 share of the stock. So instead of being a major consumer of a good, participate in the ownership. This is an example of an exercise that will help you to better understand the flow and circulation of money. Now, many of us might say, well, we're not frankly in a position to own stock or have the financial wherewithal to understand how to do it. What I would submit to you is that this is a time more important than ever to understand that through participation and ownership, you have a greater voice in our community. As we think about reforming criminal justice, I would also add to you that we must be active participants in terms of voting. The process of voting is extremely important because your voice and your visibility is only recognized when you participate in voting and choosing your elected officials. This gives you an opportunity to systemically change the criminal justice system and the disparity in terms of incarceration of minorities. We invite you, and it is my plea to all of you, that you become active and you become passionate about the process of voting. And last, I leave you with the thought that McKinsey researchers indicated 42% of minority-owned small businesses reported that obtaining credit was becoming more difficult as we think about this COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of it. The legacy of racial division has often been tied to discriminatory practices with housing, affordable quality healthcare, the persistence of underemployment and unemployment. Well, it is very important that we support our small businesses, that we become very passionate and focused about home ownership and education. 21 out of 50 states in the US today require personal finance as a core curriculum for our youth. New York is one of those 21 states that requires it. Personal finance and the understanding of financial literacy is extremely important as we fight this issue of the racial divide, as we strive to get people of color back into a state of home ownership and back into a state of, again, being able to save for their financial future. And we believe that Carver Federal Savings Bank as a community bank is here to help you with that. We hope that you found great reward out of participating in this forum, and thank you for your support of Harlem Week.
It's harder than ever to get ahead. Chase Secure Banking is right there with you to help, with the convenience to manage your money from the Chase mobile app. Plus, it helps you spend only what you have. Because you want to get ahead of your expenses and want to get ahead in life. Chase Secure Banking, helping you get ahead. Open a Chase Secure Banking account today with no minimum deposit.
Every day, over 22,000 McDonald's crew members get up and head to work. And right now, more than ever, what they do is important. Like wearing a face covering and gloves, cleaning and sanitizing the restaurant, and putting safety first. Oh, and of course, making sure your order is filled. Because sometimes a Big Mac and fries is exactly what your day was missing.
Since you can't go to concerts, now we're bringing the concert right to your living room. In celebration of Harlem Week, it's a virtual concert with the Stylistics. It's the Dramatics. And the Blue Notes. We're bringing the concert to your living room. It's all part of the Harlem Week celebration. For more information, go online to harlemweek.com.